want to go through some of the most basic solo drills that you can do. So last month we talked a lot about top positioning stuff. In this particular video, I wanted to talk about some of the basic bottom position things that you can do. Simple stuff, shrimps, bridges, sit-throughs. So my approach to shrimping, which is where I'm going to start, if you watch the videos about making a frame and lines of force, that'll explain how I like to approach shrimping. So when I'm shrimping, I have one leg up and one leg down. And so something that I learned at a Hickson Gracie seminar years ago was that when he is doing a movement like this, he suggested that you turn your leg out to an angle here so that when you press off the ground, you can keep your shoulder and your hip locked in place. So if somebody tries to put force into me, it should go through my torso, through my hip, into the ground like this. If I go here and somebody pushes into me, I'll naturally go flat. So this is one way to approach shrimping. Foot angled slightly out, pressing off the ground, so all the weight is on my shoulder. And you can see that there should be a gap underneath my body. Now the gap can be a large one if you're just practicing, or a smaller one. But the purpose of the gap is to make it so that there's not much friction between my body and the ground. If I shrimp with my whole body touching the ground, then there's all this friction and I'm dragging myself along the mat. And if you're on an abrasive surface like concrete, you're not going to go anywhere. You get jammed up. If I put all the weight onto my shoulder, now there's this gap. So when I shrimp, my hips can go back, my head can go down, and I can move freely because I'm pivoting on my shoulder. Now with my shoulder, what I talked about before about making a frame and making a structure, your shoulder can do a bunch of different things. This is the point where all your weight's going to be focused and your shoulder blade can move. So when you're here, your shoulder blade can roll forward, it can roll backwards, it can elevate, it can depress, right? So depending on where you are underneath somebody, your shoulder can be up and help you move away a little bit. Your shoulder can be forward and help you move back a little bit. It can be back and help you move forward if you need to create structure for your upper body. The shoulder can move. If you want to lock your shoulder into a frame, then I suggest pulling your shoulder down and back slightly. Right? So now I have this frame through my whole upper body. And now from here, the next part is my head is going to go down and my hips are going to go back. Like this. Now the reason I emphasize bringing the head down and the hips back is because most of the time when people talk about shrimping, they only talk about the hips. And if you only think about your hips moving when you're shrimping, what you're going to get is this. And your hips will only go that far. If you think about bringing your hips up and your head down at the same time, you get a much bigger shrimp. Now the folding part of the shrimp is only half of the movement. So moving your head down and your hips back folds you in half, like a pocket knife, but then you also have to open up after the shrimp. So when you're elbow escaping and you're trying to square back up with the person, you have to unfold, right? So a shrimp is folding and then unfolding. And this is where you also have to bring your head back. So head goes down, hips go up, and when I come back, put equal attention on bringing your head back up and your hips forward. So this folding and unfolding movement is half hips, half head. Here, here. Now, do you press off of the ball of your foot or the whole sole of the foot? That depends. If you're pressing off of the ball of your foot, then sometimes, depending on the movement that you're doing, that can give you more reach than the flat sole of the foot. It can also give you a little bit more room to change your knee angle or move your foot around or spring than a flat foot. A flat foot is better for staying firmly planted and keeping a stronger frame through your whole body, because if you go up on the ball of your foot, you just added an extra joint to the chain of movements, or the chain of this line of force. So if I'm making a line of force off the ground through my body into my shoulder and somebody's pushing into my shoulder, I have ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, 4 joints. If I go onto the ball of my foot, now I just added an extra joint to that, which means that there's one more place where that movement can go wrong, right? So depending on the circumstance, press off the ball of your foot, press off the whole sole of your foot for 2 different things, right? But just be aware that when you press off the ball of your foot, you're adding an extra joint to the chain, right? Now, with bridging, the next one is bridging. So with bridging, what I'm looking for is, again, 2 different ways to bridge. Ideally, you're bringing your feet as close to your butt as possible when you bridge. So here, and then when I bridge, the first way that you're usually taught is to press off the balls of your feet. This is correct. This will help you get, because it adds an extra joint to the chain of movement, it allows you to lift your hips higher than you would normally be able to lift them if you were flat-footed, where your hips only go so far. You can see when I add the extra joint, I get an extra couple inches of hip lift, and it also helps me extend my hip more fully, right? So you get a higher bridge pressing off of the balls of your feet. People also say that when you press off of the heels of your feet when you bridge, your feet tend to slip out. I haven't really found this to be the case, but I guess it could happen. If I do notice that if I press off of the flat ball of my foot, that my bridge is more stable and takes a little bit less effort, but I don't get the same range of motion out of my hips, and I don't get the same height out of my hip lift. So this is stable, but not quite as bridgy. This, you get much more range of motion. Now, my feet are, sorry, just checking the time. My feet are hip width apart for this particular bridge. Feet as close as possible to my butt, hip width apart. And now when I bridge also, I'm bridging diagonally up over my shoulder, and I'm opening my neck up. And then the last part is I'm pulling my shoulder blade down. If my shoulder blade is already down and I bridge, it looks like this. This is good. If my shoulder blade is up when I bridge, I'm jamming myself up, right? So if my shoulder blade is down, I have more movement. If my shoulder blade is up, I kind of get in my way a little bit, unless I go up and then I use this to travel. Now I can move further in that direction. So just another way to accomplish the bridge. Think about your shoulder blade movement. Think about making a connection through your whole body. This line of force should be going from the ground up to your hips and from your shoulder up to your hips. So it's not just the feet pressing, but it's also your shoulder keeping a strong, stable base of support. Your hips are where the force is going to be placed. So here, this is not pushing off the ground, but this is staying stable and strong. This, hips and legs, are what are pressing off the ground when I bridge.